At 2:43 a.m., my family called me from Italy asking for $28,000. What they didn't know was they had already stolen $22,400 from me, and if I paid it, it wouldn't stop there. My name is Caroline Merritt, and for 32 years I was the girl who fixed things. If a glass broke, I swept it up. If a bill was late, I paid it. If my sister Diane set her life on fire, I was the one who stood in the ashes and rebuilt the walls. I thought that was what love looked like. I thought being the responsible one meant I was the anchor of the family. I didn't realize I was actually the insurance policy. My family has always called me Carol, a nickname I never chose, but never fought either. That was the pattern with us. I accepted what was handed to me and kept moving. The realization didn't come slowly. It hit me at 2043 a.m. in my quiet Cincinnati apartment. The vibration of my phone on the nightstand sounded like a warning siren. 50 missed calls, messages from my mother, my father, and my brother Kevin. Most of them were just one word: emergency. Then came the one that stopped my heart. The police are here. Answer the phone, Caroline, now. I sat up in the dark, my hands shaking as I dialed my father back. I expected to hear about a car accident or a heart attack. I didn't expect to hear the screaming of an Italian villa owner and the cold reality that my family hadn't just broken my heart. They had stolen my life to pay for a wedding that didn't exist. I remember my 10th birthday clearly, not because of the cake or the presents, but because of the silence. My mother had forgotten to buy candles. I sat at the small kitchen table in our house in suburban Ohio, looking at a chocolate cake that looked lonely. Before I could even make a wish, the front door slammed open. Diane, who was 12 at the time, came running in crying because she had scraped her knee falling off a friend's bike. My mother dropped the lighter. My father dropped the camera. They both ran to her. They spent the next hour cleaning a scratch that didn't even bleed, while I sat in the kitchen and watched the frosting on my cake get hard. I eventually got up, put the cake in a plastic container, and started washing the dishes. That was the day I realized the hierarchy of our home. Diane was the sun, and my parents were the planets orbiting her, desperate to keep her warm. I was just the floor they walked on to get to her. Growing up with Diane was like living with a storm that never ended. She didn't just have moods, she had events. If she was happy, the whole house had to dance. If she was sad, we all had to mourn. My parents, Robert and Beverly, lived in a constant state of anxiety regarding her happiness. They called it supporting her spirit. I called it exhaustion. By the time we were in high school, the patterns were set in stone. Diane joined the cheer squad, but she needed the most expensive uniforms and private coaching. My parents took extra shifts at the warehouse and the pharmacy to pay for it. When she crashed the family car 3 weeks after getting her license, my father didn't yell. He stroked her hair while she sobbed about how scary the accident was. Then he looked at me. "Carol," he said, his voice tired but firm, "you'll have to take the bus to your after-school job for a while. We need the insurance money to fix the car for Diane. She needs it to get to practice." I worked at a local library shelving books for minimum wage. I was saving for college because I knew even then that there was no college fund for the quiet daughter. Every cent I earned went into a savings account that I hid like a secret. I watched Diane spend her graduation money on clothes and concert tickets. I watched my parents refinance our home for the first time when Diane decided she wanted to go to a private arts college that she dropped out of after one semester. "She's just finding herself," my mother would tell me when I asked why they were struggling to pay the heating bill. "Not everyone is a machine like you, Caroline. You're strong. Diane is delicate." I hated that word, delicate. It was a hall pass for selfishness. Because I was strong, I was expected to carry the groceries, the emotional baggage, and eventually the debt. I worked through college, holding down 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. I remember a winter in Cincinnati during my sophomore year when my boots had a hole in the bottom. My feet were constantly wet and frozen. I called home, hoping maybe my parents could send $60 for a new pair. "Oh, Carol," my mom said on the phone, "we're actually a bit tight this month." Diane decided to move to Phoenix to try modeling, and she needed help with the security deposit. "You're so good with money, honey. You'll figure it out." I hung up and cried in the library bathroom for 10 minutes. Then I dried my eyes, went to the supply closet, and used duct tape to seal my boots. I didn't ask again. By the time I was 28, I had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. I was a senior financial analyst at a firm in downtown Cincinnati. I had a beautiful minimalist apartment in Hyde Park. I had a credit score that was nearly perfect because I treated my finances like a sacred religion. I was the success story. But to my family, my success wasn't a source of pride, it was a resource. The calls shifted from "How are you?" to "We're short on the mortgage." It started small, 250 here, 600 there. I paid it because I felt guilty for having a life they didn't have. I paid it because I wanted them to love me as much as they loved the chaos Diane created. I thought if I was the solution to every problem, eventually I would be the favorite. But favoritism isn't earned through merit, it's a chemical reaction, and I didn't have the right ingredients. Diane could call them after 6 months of silence, ask for 1,100, and they would give it with a smile. I could work 80 hours a week, and they would only call to ask why I hadn't checked in on my sister lately. "She's struggling, Caroline," my father would say. "She's working as a waitress, and the tips are bad. Why don't you Venmo her something for her birthday? You have so much." "I have so much because I work, Dad," I'd respond. "Don't be cold," he'd sigh. "Family isn't a business, but it was a business, and I was the only one generating revenue." When the news broke about the Italian wedding, I was sitting in a board meeting looking at a spreadsheet of projected quarterly losses. My phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It was a photo from Diane. It was a picture of a ring. It was massive, a pear-shaped diamond that looked like it cost more than my car. The caption read, "I'm going to be a countess. We're getting married at Lake Garda." I felt a pit in my stomach, not out of jealousy, but out of a deep, familiar sense of dread. Diane had been traveling through Europe for 4 months on a soul-searching trip that my parents had funded by selling my grandmother's antique jewelry. Now, she was engaged to a man named Marco Ricci. According to Diane's breathless FaceTime calls, Marco Ricci was the heir to a textile fortune. He had a villa, a boat, and an accent that made my mother swoon. "He's the one, Carol," Diane squealed, her face filtered to perfection on my screen. "He wants the wedding in September, a private villa, a designer gown. It's going to be the event of the century." "Diane," I said, my voice flat, "you've known him for 10 weeks. Have you seen his bank statements? Have you met his family?" "You're so cynical," she hissed, her lip trembling. "Just because you're married to your calculator doesn't mean I can't have a fairy tale. Mum and Dad are already booking their flights." I called my parents that night. "How are you paying for this?" I asked without a greeting. "Marco is handling the big things," my father said, though he sounded defensive. "But we have to do our part. We're the parents of the bride. We have to show them we're people of substance." "You don't have substance, Dad. You have a second mortgage." "We're using a little bit of credit," my mother chimed in. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, Caroline. Don't ruin this for her. You're always so focused on the bottom line. Can't you just be happy that your sister is finally being taken care of?" For the next 2 months, my family's social media was a parade of excess. Photos of silk fabric swatches, wine tastings via Zoom, and guest lists that included people they hadn't spoken to in a decade. Every time I tried to bring up the logistics, I was shut out. I was the Debbie Downer. I was the jealous sister. Then the invitation arrived. It was hand-pressed gold foil on heavy cream card stock. The venue was a villa on the shores of Lake Garda. The dress code was black tie opulence. I sat in my apartment and looked at that invitation for a long time. I knew what it represented. It represented a debt that would never be repaid. I knew my parents couldn't afford the flight, let alone the designer suits they were buying. I knew Kevin, my brother, was taking time off his construction job, time he couldn't afford, to be a groomsman. "I'm not going," I told my mother a week later. The silence on the other end of the line was cold. "What do you mean you aren't going?" I mean, I can't support this. It's reckless. You guys are spending money you don't have on a man you don't know. If I go, I'm validating this insanity, and I won't do it. You're a monster, my mother whispered. Your only sister is getting married in the most beautiful place on earth, and you're staying home to look at numbers. You've always been selfish, Caroline. You've always looked down on us because you have a fancy degree and a high-rise office. I'm selfish because I don't want to watch you go bankrupt, I yelled. If you don't come, don't bother calling us for a long time, she said, and then she hung up. I stayed behind. I watched the wedding unfold through Instagram stories. I saw my mother in a dress that probably cost 3 months of groceries. I saw my father looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo, standing next to Marco Ricci, who looked like a movie star but had eyes that never quite reached his smile. The photos were breathtaking. The lake was a deep, shimmering blue. The flowers were piled so high they looked like clouds. Diane looked like a queen. In every photo, my family looked perfect. They looked like the people they always wanted to be, wealthy, carefree, and loved. I spent that weekend in Cincinnati cleaning my apartment and going for long runs by the river. I felt a strange sense of peace mixed with a lingering sadness. I was the outcast, but for once, I wasn't the one paying for the party, or so I thought. I went to bed early on Sunday night, feeling like I had finally set a boundary that would stick. I turned my phone on Do Not Disturb and fell into a deep sleep. I didn't know that while I was sleeping, the fairy tale was screaming to a halt. I didn't know that the Count was currently stripping the villa of everything valuable. I didn't know that the police were being called. And I certainly didn't know that my name, my clean, hard-earned, carefully protected name, was written on every single legal document that was currently being handed to the Italian authorities. I was dreaming of a quiet life. My family was busy making sure I'd never have one again. The silence of my apartment was broken at exactly 2043 a.m. It wasn't a gentle waking. It was the kind of sound that rips through your subconscious and tells your heart to start racing before your eyes even open. My phone was dancing across the nightstand, the vibration buzzing against the wood like a trapped insect. I ignored the first 3 calls. I assumed it was my mother drunk on expensive champagne at Lake Garda, wanting to rub her joy in my face. I assumed it was a "we missed you" call that was actually a "look what you missed" jab. But then the text started. My screen lit up the dark room with a clinical white glare. Emergency. Answer now. When I finally pressed the phone to my ear, I didn't hear music or laughter. I heard a sound I will never forget. My mother's scream. It wasn't a scream of physical pain. It was the high-pitched, jagged wailing of someone who had just watched their entire reality shatter. In the background, there were other sounds. Deep, authoritative voices speaking rapid-fire, Italian, the heavy thud of boots on marble, and the unmistakable rhythmic pulse of sirens. "Caroline, Caroline, help us." My father's voice broke through. He wasn't yelling, he was gasping like he'd been running. "Everything is gone." "He's gone. Dad, what are you talking about? Who's gone?" I sat up, the chill of the Cincinnati night seeping into my bones. "Marco," my father choked out. "The groom, the Count. He's a fraud, Carol. He's a nobody. He left in the middle of the night. He took the gift envelopes. He took the jewelry. He even took the deposits for the catering." My stomach dropped. I wanted to say I told you so. I wanted to scream that I had warned them months ago that counts don't find American girls on Instagram and marry them in 60 days. But the desperation in his voice stopped me. "Where is Diane?" I asked, my voice trembling. She's hysterical," he said. "She started throwing things when she found the note. She spiraled for hours, throwing anything she could reach. She smashed the hand-painted vases in the foyer. She ripped the silk hangings off the walls." Kevin tried to stop her, but he got into a fight with the villa manager. The manager called the carabinieri. "They're here, Carol. They won't let us leave." I looked at the clock. It was mid-morning in Italy. The wedding of the century had lasted less than 12 hours. "The owner," my father continued, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper, He says the damage to the villa is catastrophic. The vases were 18th century antiques, the tapestries. He's saying it's over 28,000. The police have our passports. They say if we don't pay the immediate security deposit for the damages and the unpaid rental balance, they're taking Diane and Kevin to the station. Number 28,000, I repeated. The number felt like a physical weight. Dad, I don't have that kind of liquid cash just sitting in a checking account. That's a year of my mortgage. You have to find it. My mother shrieked in the background, having grabbed the phone from him. Caroline, your sister is sitting on the floor in handcuffs. They're treating us like criminals. You're sitting there in your fancy apartment while we're rotting in a foreign country. Wire the money, use your savings, use your credit, just get us out of here. Mom, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down, she roared. You were too busy to come and now you're too selfish to help. This is your family. Do you want your brother to go to an Italian prison? Do you want Diane to kill herself? Because she will. She's saying she'll jump in the lake. I closed my eyes. The familiar guilt, that old heavy blanket, tried to settle over my shoulders. I pictured Diane, the delicate one, ruining an ancient villa because her feelings were hurt. I pictured my parents, who had ignored my warnings, now demanding I set my own future on fire to put out theirs. I need to think, I said. I need to see what I can move around. I'll call you back. Don't think, my father pleaded. Just call the bank. Please, Carol, call your bank and tell them you need to authorize a transfer. They said the wire has to be initiated immediately. I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I walked to my kitchen and poured a glass of water, but I couldn't drink it. The silence of my apartment felt predatory. I felt like I was being hunted by my own DNA. That's when everything stopped feeling like a crisis and started feeling like a setup. I sat down at my laptop. I intended to check my brokerage account to see if I could sell some stocks. I was already doing the math, calculating how many years this would set back my retirement, how many months I'd have to work overtime to replace the emergency fund that was about to be drained by a fake count and a temper tantrum. But as I logged into my primary banking portal, something stopped me. A small red notification icon was blinking next to my account summary. It wasn't my savings account, it was a credit card account I didn't recognize. I am a financial analyst. My entire life is built on the precision of numbers. I know every cent that enters and exits my orbit. So when I saw an international platinum rewards account listed under my name, an account I had never applied for, my heart didn't just race, it went cold. I clicked on the details. The account had been opened about a month ago. The billing address was my parents' house in suburban Ohio, but the primary cardholder was Caroline J. Merritt. I felt a surge of nausea. I scrolled down to the recent activity. Villa deposit, $8,000. Milano bridal final payment, $4,500. Lufthansa, 4 round-trip tickets, $5,200. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't even have to look at the rest. The total balance was hovering just under $22,400. This was the credit my mother had mentioned on the phone weeks ago. She hadn't meant their credit. They didn't have any left. Their scores were in the basement, buried under refinanced mortgages and unpaid store cards. They had used mine. I opened a second tab and logged into my credit monitoring service. My perfect score had already dipped 60 points. I saw 2 other inquiries I hadn't authorized. They hadn't just opened 1 card, they had attempted 3. I remembered my father's voice on the phone just minutes ago. Call your bank, he had said. He didn't say, can you lend us the money? He said, call your bank. He wasn't asking for a loan. He was trying to get me to authorize the very accounts they had fraudulently created so I couldn't claim identity theft later. If I wired that $22,400, it wouldn't end there. It would just be the beginning. I would be effectively co-signing the fraud. I would be acknowledging that these were my expenses. I would be legally tying myself to the wreckage of Diane's wedding. I sat in the glow of the screen, the blue light washing over my face. I thought about all the times I had saved them. I thought about the car insurance, the utility bills, the loans that were never repaid. I realized that my parents hadn't just seen me as a safety net. They had seen me as an identity they could inhabit when theirs became too heavy to carry. They had my social security number. They had my birth certificate. They had everything they needed to pretend to be me. I pulled up the digital copy of the villa rental agreement that had been sent to the account holder's email, an email address that was a variation of my name, one I had never created. I scrolled to the bottom of the PDF. There it was, my signature, except it wasn't mine. It was a clumsy imitation. The C too loopy, the M too slanted. It was my mother's handwriting trying to look like my professional cursive. A wave of such profound betrayal washed over me that I actually had to stand up and walk to the window. Between the damages, the stolen deposits, and the fraudulent credit cards, the total damage had climbed to over $50,000. My name, my credit, my future. All of it signed away without a single conversation. I looked out at the Cincinnati skyline. The city looked so indifferent. Millions of people were sleeping, tucked into their beds, trusting the people they loved. And here I was, realizing that my own parents had looked at my hard work, my late nights at the office, my carefully managed life, and decided it was theirs for the taking. They didn't care about my career. They didn't care if I lost my job because of a fraud investigation. They didn't care if my credit was ruined and I lost my apartment. They only cared that Diane had her flowers. They only cared that they could play act as wealthy aristocrats for a weekend in Italy. I picked up my phone. It was vibrating again. It was a text from Kevin. "Carol, please. They're taking us to the station. Just pay the bill. We'll figure it out when we get home. Please don't let them take me." My brother. The one who always went along with them, the one who never stood up for me when Diane was being a brat. He was using the same tactic, the family first card. But I wasn't family to them. I was a facility. I was a bank with a daughter's face. I looked at the Italian police officer's number that my father had texted me earlier in the night. He had sent it so I could verify the emergency to my bank. My finger hovered over the screen. For 32 years, I had been the girl who swept up the glass. I had been the one who made sure everyone else was okay, even if I was bleeding. I thought about my cold, wet feet in those duct-taped boots in college. I thought about the cake with no candles. I realized that if I saved them now, I would be drowning with them for the rest of my life. There would always be another count. There would always be another emergency. I didn't call my bank. I didn't authorize the wire. I dialed the number for the Carabinieri at Lake Garda. "Pronto," a man's voice answered. He sounded tired, overwhelmed by the drama of American tourists. "Hello," I said, my voice steady, my heart like a stone in my chest. "My name is Caroline Merritt. I'm calling from Cincinnati. You have a group of Americans in custody regarding a villa rental and property damage. My parents and siblings." Yes," the officer said in accented English. "The Merritt family, you are the one paying the settlement." "No," I said clearly. "I am the woman whose identity was stolen to book that villa. I am the victim of the fraud you are currently investigating." There was a long silence on the other end. In the background, I could hear my mother's voice rise in a sharp, frantic peak. She knew. Even across the ocean, she could probably feel the wind changing. "I am reporting a crime," I whispered to the dark room. "And I have the documents to prove it." The silence that followed my statement to the Italian officer was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It wasn't just the silence of a phone line. It was the silence of a bridge collapsing. For a few seconds, I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I could only hear the ghost of my mother's laughter from a week ago on Instagram, and the way my father used to call me his good, steady girl. "Signorina," the officer finally asked. His voice had lost its impatient edge. Now it was sharp, professional. "You are saying the signatures, the credit accounts used for the booking, these are not yours?" "They are not mine," I said. I was staring at my reflection in the dark glass of my oven door. I looked like a stranger to myself. I have never been to Italy. I am at my desk in Cincinnati. I did not sign that lease. I did not open that credit line. My parents and my sister used my personal information without my consent. "This is a very serious claim," the officer replied. "Your father, Robert Merritt, he told us you were the primary financier. He said you were the one who organized the celebration. He lied, I said. The word felt like a shard of glass in my throat, but I forced it out. He's been lying for a long time. Please check the IP addresses for the account applications. Check the passport records for the person who signed the villa contract. You will see that I haven't left the United States in 3 years. As I spoke, my phone started vibrating again. It was a call waiting notification from my father, then a text from Diane. Why aren't you responding? The police are talking to each other. Carol, do something. I ignored them. I stayed on the line with the officer, whose name was Captain Ferraro. I gave him my social security number, my employer's contact information, and the names of the banks where the fraudulent accounts had been opened. I am sending you an email now, Captain, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It contains my flight records, my GPS history from my phone for the last month, and a scan of my actual signature. You will see the difference immediately. As I hit send, I felt a strange sensation. It was as if a physical cord that had been wrapped around my chest since childhood was suddenly cut. The pressure was gone, but the wound was raw. I was setting a trap, but not the kind they had set for me. They had built a trap of debt and guilt, expecting me to walk into it like I always did. They thought the responsible daughter would value the family's reputation more than her own soul. They thought I would be too afraid of the monster label to actually fight back. But I wasn't fighting back with anger. I was fighting back with the only thing they had never respected, the truth. I hung up with Captain Ferraro and immediately called my bank's fraud department. I sat on hold for 20 minutes, listening to calm jazz while my family's lives and mine hung in the balance. When a representative finally answered, I went through the steps. I need to report 3 counts of identity theft, I said. Yes, I know the suspects. They are my family. The woman on the other end paused. I could hear her typing. Mom, you should know that once we open this investigation, we are legally required to involve the authorities. If the fraud is proven, it could lead to criminal charges. I understand, I said. And because the transactions involve international merchants, this will be escalated to the federal level, she added, her voice softening. Are you sure you want to proceed? Most people in your situation try to settle it privately. I've spent 32 years settling things privately, I told her. It didn't work. Please freeze the accounts and issue the fraud affidavit. By the time I finished the paperwork, it was 5:30 a.m. in Cincinnati. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the city was starting to groan to life. I walked to my balcony and looked out. The air was freezing, but I didn't go back inside. I wanted to feel the cold. I wanted to feel anything other than the hollow, aching vacuum in my chest. My phone rang one last time. It was my father. I answered it. Caroline, he whispered. He sounded like he was hiding in a closet. What did you say to that man, the officer? He just took Diane into a separate room. He's looking at us differently. He told us there's an issue with the payment verification. I told him the truth, Dad, I said. My voice was so steady it surprised me. The truth? What truth? Carol, we're in trouble. Real trouble. You're going to get your mother arrested. No, I said. Mum got herself arrested when she forged my name on a $28,000 contract. You got yourself arrested when you gave them my credit card number instead of your own. You didn't even ask me. You just took. You took, and you took until there was nothing left but my name. And then you took that too. We were going to pay it back, he hissed. Diane was going to marry a billionaire. We would have settled everything within a month. We just needed a bridge, a little help. There is no billionaire, Dad. There never was. There was only a waiter who saw a family of desperate, shallow people and decided to play the part you wanted. You fell for a lie because you wanted it to be true. But I'm not a lie. I'm a real person with a real life that you were willing to destroy for a wedding cake. You're a cold, heartless, he spat. The mask was finally off. The doting father was gone, replaced by the man who had always resented me for being the only person in the house who could balance a checkbook. You've always thought you were better than us. Now you're going to let your own flesh and blood go to jail over a few dollars. You're dead to us, Caroline. Do you hear me? Dead. I've been dead to you for years, I said. You just finally noticed because I stopped paying the funeral costs. I hung up. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't wait for the scream I knew was coming from my mother. I turned the phone off and sat in the dark, watching the sky turn from black to a bruised, heavy purple. The next few days were a blur of documentation and silence. I didn't turn my phone back on for 36 hours. When I finally did, the sheer volume of messages nearly crashed the device. There were hundreds of texts, emails, and voicemails from my mother. "I hope you're happy. We're staying in a hostel because we can't afford a hotel, and the police won't let us leave the country. I hate you. I never should have had you." From Kevin, "They're taking my truck, Carol. The bank found out about the secondary loan Dad took out in my name. You started a landslide. Stop it." From Diane, "You ruined my wedding. You ruined my life. I have nothing. I hope you rot in that cold apartment." I sat at my kitchen table and read every single one of them. I read them like I was studying a foreign language. I waited for the guilt to come. I waited for that familiar, sickening urge to pick up the phone and apologize. I waited for the part of me that was the fixer to take over and find a way to make it all go away. But that part of me was gone. She had died at 2043 a.m. on Monday. Instead of guilt, I felt a profound, chilling clarity. I started to look back at my life through a different lens. I realized that my entire identity had been constructed around their needs. I wasn't responsible because I liked being organized. I was responsible because, if I wasn't, we would have starved. I wasn't strong because I was born that way. I was strong because I was never allowed to be weak. I remembered being 6 years old and getting the flu. I had a fever of 103. I remember lying on the couch shaking while my mother practiced a dance routine with Diane in the living room. "Carol, honey, can you get yourself some ginger ale?" my mother had asked, not stopping the music. "We have to get this choreography right for Diane's recital tomorrow. You're such a big girl, you can handle it." I had crawled to the kitchen on my hands and knees to get a glass of water. I thought that made me a big girl. Now I realized it just made me a neglected child. I realized that they didn't hate me because I was different or cynical. They hated me because my existence reminded them of their own failures. Every time I succeeded, it was a mirror reflecting their chaos. Every time I saved money, it was a reminder that they had wasted theirs. They didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be available. They had never loved Caroline Merritt. They loved the utility of Caroline Merritt. I went to my office that Thursday. My boss, a man named Mr. Stay. Calloway, who usually only spoke to me about interest rates, asked me into his office. "Caroline," he said, looking at a letter on his desk, "I received a call from a federal investigator regarding some domestic fraud issues. They were asking about your salary and your employment history to verify some loan applications." I felt my face heat up. The shame was still there, lurking in the corners. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Calloway. My family—" "Stop," he said, holding up a hand. "I've been in this business a long time. I've seen what happens when people get desperate. The investigator told me you were the one who reported it. He told me you were cooperating fully." I nodded, unable to speak. "It takes a lot of courage to do what you did," he said. "Most people would have just let it slide until it ruined them. You're a sharp analyst, Caroline. You saw the risk and you mitigated it. Don't let their choices define your professional standing here. You're one of our best." I walked out of his office and went to the bathroom. I locked the stall and cried, not because I was sad, but because a stranger had shown me more respect and validation in 5 minutes than my parents had in 32 years. I looked at the Merritt on my ID badge. It was a name I shared with people who were currently being questioned by the FBI and the Italian police. It was a name that felt like a brand. I realized then that the trap wasn't the credit card or the villa. The trap was the belief that I owed them my life just because they gave it to me. They hadn't given me a life. They had given me a debt. And for the first time, I looked at the balance sheet and realized I didn't owe them a single cent. I went home and started a new folder on my computer. I titled it The Clean Slate. In it, I put the police reports, the fraud affidavit, and a copy of my credit report, which was slowly being corrected. I also put a scan of my birth certificate. I looked at the names of the people who were supposed to protect me. I realized they were just people, flawed, selfish, small people. They weren't monsters in a story. They were just adults who had never grown up, and I was the adult who was finally going to stop parenting them. The moment of truth wasn't a big explosion. It was the quiet realization that the phone wasn't ringing anymore because I had blocked them. The silence wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a house that was no longer on fire. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had caught the shoe. I had looked at it, and then I had thrown it away. The air in my apartment felt different. It was thin and cold, but it was mine. For 3 days, I had lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the final blow. I knew my father's dead to us comment wasn't the end. With my family, the end only comes when the money truly runs out or the gates lock shut. Over the next 24 hours, the machinery of 2 countries quietly began to move. Emails were exchanged, records were pulled. The fraud affidavit worked its way from my Cincinnati kitchen table to a desk in Washington and then to an office in Garda. On Friday morning, my lawyer called. He had been coordinating with the Italian authorities. "Caroline," he said, his voice grave. "The Italian prosecutor is moving forward because the villa owner is a prominent figure in the Lake Garda region. They aren't letting this slide as a family dispute. They see the forged documents as a criminal attempt to defraud a local business. Your parents are being detained at a facility in Garda until a formal bond is set. And because the credit cards were issued by a US bank, the FBI has opened a file here." He paused, giving me a moment to breathe. "They want a final statement. They need to know if you are willing to testify that you did not give verbal or written authorization for these accounts. If you say yes, your parents and potentially your sister will face felony charges. If you say no, or if you stay silent, the debt becomes yours. All $54,000 of it, including the damages." This was it, the moment I had to choose between their freedom and my life. I looked at a photo on my mantle. It was from 5 years ago. We were all at a Thanksgiving dinner. I was the one who had bought the turkey, cooked the sides, and cleaned the kitchen. In the photo, Diane is laughing. My mother is leaning into my father, and I am standing at the very edge of the frame, half blurred, looking at the timer on the oven. I wasn't a person in that family. I was a servant. "I'm ready," I told the lawyer. He patched the call through to the investigator assigned to the case. A man named Special Agent Dawson answered. "Miss Merritt," Dawson said, "I have your parents on a recorded line from the consulate. They are claiming that you had a verbal agreement to fund the wedding as a gift to your sister. They say you're only reporting it as fraud now because you had a falling out with Diane. Is that true?" I felt a surge of heat in my chest. Even now, facing prison, they were trying to paint me as the emotional, jealous sister. They were trying to gaslight the federal government. "Agent Dawson," I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning in Cincinnati. "I am a financial analyst. I document everything. Please look at my email records from 4 months ago. You will see a dozen messages where I explicitly told my mother, Beverly Merritt, that I would not contribute a single dollar to this wedding because it was a financial disaster. You will see my bank statement showing I was saving for a down payment on a property, money they tried to intercept." I took a deep breath. My parents did not have an agreement with me. They had a blueprint of my life and they tried to tear it down to build a fantasy for my sister. I am not a gift. I am a victim of identity theft. I want to press charges. I want every account closed. I want my name scrubbed from every document they signed. In the background, I heard a faint, muffled sound. It was my mother. She was screaming in the investigator's office on the other end. "You're killing us, Caroline. You're killing your mother." "No, Mom," I whispered, though she couldn't hear me. "I'm just stopping you from killing me." I hung up the phone. It was over. The choice was made. I had officially traded my family for my freedom. The weeks that followed were quiet. It was a terrifying, beautiful kind of silence. The landslide my brother Kevin had warned me about happened exactly as predicted. Without my credit to lean on, my parents' house went into foreclosure. Diane's count turned out to be a man with 3 prior arrests for similar scams across Europe. He was never found. My parents and Diane were eventually allowed to return to the US under a deferred prosecution agreement, mostly because I didn't want to pay the legal fees to fly to Italy to testify in person. But the damage was done. They had to sell everything. They moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to look down on. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't read the letters they sent, which I could see through the envelopes were written in my mother's frantic, loopy handwriting. I spent my evenings differently now. I didn't spend them checking my accounts for surprises. I didn't spend them wondering if Diane was okay. I spent them sitting on my balcony watching the cars go by on the parkway. One Saturday, I went to a coffee shop and just sat there for 3 hours. I didn't bring work. I didn't check my phone. I just watched people. I saw a mother and daughter at the table next to me. The daughter was about 8. She spilled her cocoa. And the mother didn't scream. She didn't tell the girl to be a big girl and fix it. She just reached out, wiped the girl's chin and said, "It's okay, sweetie. It's just a mess. We can clean it." I started to cry into my latte. I cried for the 6-year-old Caroline who had to crawl for her own ginger ale. I cried for the 20-year-old Caroline who taped her boots shut. I cried because for 32 years I thought I was the one who was wrong for not being enough. The freedom didn't feel like a party. It felt like a long, slow exhale. I changed my phone number. I changed my locks. I even changed the way I walked. I used to walk with my shoulders hunched as if I were bracing for someone to jump on my back and ask for a ride. Now I walk straight. I realized that family is a word people use to keep you in line when love isn't enough to do the job. If they had loved me, they wouldn't have needed to remind me we were family. I would have felt it. But all I ever felt was a sense of duty. Now my only duty was to myself. I froze my credit permanently. I set up alerts that would email me if so much as a library card was applied for in my name. I was an island, and for the first time in my life, the water was calm. It has been 1 year since the 2043 a.m. call. This morning, I woke up before my alarm. The sun was hitting the white walls of my bedroom. There was no noise, no frantic texts, no emergencies that required my bank account. I made a cup of black coffee and stood by the window. I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. I heard through a mutual cousin that Diane is working at a local mall. My parents are barely speaking to each other, blaming one another for the Italian disaster. They tell anyone who will listen that their oldest daughter is a monster who abandoned them in their hour of need. I used to be terrified of that word, monster. I used to think that being a good person meant saying yes until you disappeared, but I realized something important. If being a good daughter meant allowing myself to be robbed, lied to, and used as a human shield for my sister's vanity, then I didn't want to be good. I wanted to be whole. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop helping people who are dedicated to destroying themselves. You have to step out of the water so they can finally feel how deep it is. I don't hate them. Hate is too much energy, and I've spent enough energy on them to power a city for a century. I just don't know them anymore. They are people I used to live with. They are characters in a book I finally finished reading. I put my coffee cup down and picked up a book I've been wanting to read for years. It's a book about travel, not for a wedding, not for someone else's dream, just for me. I'm thinking of going to Japan. Somewhere where no one knows the name Merit. Somewhere where I can just be Caroline. Revenge isn't about making them suffer. Their lives are already a prison of their own making. Revenge is about living a life so quiet, so peaceful, and so full of your own joy that their voices can't even reach the outskirts of your mind. I am 32 years old. My credit is restored. My heart is scarred, but it's beating in a steady, healthy rhythm. I am not the girl who fixes things anymore. I am the woman who is finally free.